Here we're going to talk about risk preferences. So what we need to do is we need to start with expected utility theory, which we'll often refer to as EUT. Now, when we think about expected utility theory, we have to define a few terms. And the first thing that we have to say when we think about this is to think about what we mean by risk. So we separate two things. A risky situation is one in which there are several possible outcomes and the probability of each is known. Okay, so that's a risky set of outcomes. There are possible outcomes or prospects, as we'll say, and the probability of each is known. Now, it's very important to separate this from what we mean when we say kind of uncertainty. And that typically implies situations where we don't know the probabilities. So we're typically going to be talking about risky situations here, right? Now, there's another way of dealing with uncertainty, which we're not going to go into here. It's got to do with how we think about the probability distributions of different outcomes, but that's beyond what we're going to be doing and beyond the scope of what we try to think about here. Right now, we're going to talk about risky situations. And so with risky situations, we talk about the idea of a prospect. Okay, so prospect. And with a prospect, what we have to think about is that a prospect is a list of probabilities and outcomes. Okay, so it's a list of probabilities and outcomes. So for example, if we have a different set of outcomes 1 through n, we can pair lists of probabilities and outcomes in the following way. If the thing that we get in a different outcome is y, okay? So we want to think here, we've got p1, y1, p1, y1, p2, comma, y2, pn, comma, yn. So those are showing us the different sets of probabilities and outcomes that can occur, where y is what we get in an outcome and p is the probability that that outcome occurs. Okay, now each of these things, when we think about these prospects, we have to say, okay, well, when I think about that, what am I going to be thinking about next? Well, typically when we think about this, we say in economics that each of these y's, right, we are going to think about that not just in terms of the actual good y or the actual amount of money or the actual state of the world, we think about it in terms of our utility of that thing, right? So our utility of yi. And so I would have the utility of outcome y1. I would have the utility of outcome y2, and so on until I get the utility of outcome yn. Each of these are utilities of different outcomes. Okay, so it's not just the thing itself, it's the utility that we derive from that thing. And so you can see here that if I have an outcome y and the probability of that thing, I now am going to think about pairing the probability with the outcome. So I've got the p and I've got y1. I've got p1 and I've got y1. I've got p2 and I've got y2. I've got pn and I've got uyn. So what I then want to think about is multiplying each of these things by the probability with which they occur. So uy1, that's going to occur with probability p1. uy2, that's going to occur with probability p2. uyn, that's going to occur with probability pn. Okay, so I've got y1, y2 all the way down to yn, and each of them occurring with different probabilities, p1, p2, all the way down to pn. Okay, so we have each of these, and we're thinking about this prospect. with these different outcomes and these different probabilities that each one occurs. And we have to think to ourselves, oof, okay, well, how do I evaluate all of these together? Well, the way that we do that is with the expected utility of a given prospect. So if we have a prospect and we call this whole prospect, this is prospect A. Well, what we can then do is say, all right, well, I have the expected utility of the prospect A, and that's going to be equal the sum from I equals 1 to n of the probability of each outcome multiplied by the utility that I derive of each of those things. So if y1 is what I get over here at with outcome 1, and that occurs with probability p1, and p2 and y2 and pn and yn, I take the probability, I multiply it by the utility of that outcome, I sum all of those together, as we're saying over here, sum all of those probabilities times the utilities, and that gets us the expected utility, pi times u yi. That is our expected utility. Right, so what do we have there? That is our expected utility. And that is a very important starting point for us to think about expected utility versus alternative theories. Now, just very importantly, just a reminder, you've probably seen expected values before. And an expected value, what will be happening there? We'll be using that idea as well. But the important thing with an expected value is we're just talking about pi times yi. So if I had an EV here, expected value, that would be summing up from, again, I equals 1 to n, the probability of an outcome times the outcome itself. So imagine if you had two different outcomes, the probability of getting $50 or 50 pounds and the probability of getting £0, and each of those occur with 50% probability, so 0.5. 0.5 times 50 is 25. 0.5 times 0 is 0. 25 plus 0 is 25. That would be the expected value. Right? So that's just talking about money terms. But that would, in terms of thinking about it in terms of just straight money, that would just be our expected value, right? I have not mentioned at all our subjective experience of that, which we have to use our expected utility for, okay? Because there, it could be that the expected utility to me of having $0 and the expected utility to me of having $50, those are going to be quite different from just the straight monetary value of them. We have to think about what those will look like and what those mean in terms of expected utility theory.